In the late 1920s, Prohibition remained the law in the U.S., and as law enforcement remained unable to control illegal alcohol distribution and the street violence it spawned, police turned to informants from within the gangs themselves. Welcome to an audio version of an original article by Kathi Kresol, operator of Haunted Rockford Paranormal Events, Rockford, Illinois. This audio presentation is entitled Prohibition, Snoopers and Spotters and contains the 2015 story of the same name. This audio article is produced by Haunted Rockford. Prohibition was a dangerous time in Rockford's history. Police conducted raids on houses and speakeasies, seeming to be always one step behind the rum runners. By 1923, the police were desperately trying to catch up. They developed undercover men called Snoopers and Spotters. These men worked from the inside of the bootlegger business and reported back to the police on the makers and the sellers of the illegal liquids. Rival gangs also employed snoopers to gain inside knowledge of the other gangs' activities. But these undercover operators had a terrible side effect. When these men started reporting what they found, the gangs retaliated with gunfire. The first incident occurred on the corner of South Main and Morgan Streets. This area of Rockford was the center for the illegal activity associated with these gangs. Believed to be one of the first victims was 19-year-old Adam Lingus. Lingus lived on South Winnebago Street and was known in the neighborhood for his disfigured face. He had a noticeable scar and a hair lip that made him very self-conscious. Lingus became a ward of the state when his parents forced him to leave their house. Philip Otto owned a cafe called Otto Inn at 219 Morgan Street and supposedly helped Lingus by feeding him. On December 30th, 1923, Otto shot Lingus. Lingus lived for a while after the shooting and gave conflicting stories to the police. Philip Otto first claimed that an unidentified drunk man shot Lingus. Then, after hours of intense questioning by the police, Otto stated the shooting was an accident. He was cleaning the gun in the kitchen, and it discharged and hit Lingus in the side. The .38 caliber bullet entered into his right side and passed through both of his lungs. The police suspected they had the actual shooter in Otto. What they could not discern was the motive. There was no known argument between the men, no love triangle, and no jealousy issues. They could not find any reason for Otto to shoot Adam Lingus. Philip Otto was charged for Lingus's murder and at trial acquitted, and he went back to running his cafe. He was arrested numerous times over the years for selling illegal liquor. A newspaper article from 1930 suggested that Adam Lingus was a spotter for the police and that Otto had discovered this and shot him. In 1925, there was another bad batch of hooch that circulated, but this time the effects were worse than just making people sick. Near the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad line in Rockford, there was a sand house that was a popular hangout for hobos and transients near Kent Creek. Two of the men who rendezvoused there were John Wickler and William Waller. These men were old friends, and they had been unemployed for a while by November 1925. Apparently, the men had made a visit to their favorite bootlegger on November 4th. Neither of the men could know that it would be their last. Police found John Wickler not far from the sand house around 3 o'clock that cold afternoon. Wickler was staggering around, and police initially thought he was intoxicated, so they took him to jail to sober up. Wickler soon started having seizures and died in his cell. A short time later, an anonymous person called in a tip that there was a body inside the sand house near the railroad line. The police went to investigate and found William Waller inside. He was obviously dead, and the appearance of his body led officers to believe that he had been so for several hours. Despite an intense investigation, the makers of the poisonous liquor were never found. Authorities in Rockford decided to go all out for a Make Rockford Dry by Christmas campaign. The police department and the sheriff's office combined forces and held a succession of raids of houses and known speakeasies. On December 2nd, authorities raided 10 houses and arrested 2 men and 2 women. Police, working with spotters from Chicago, had gathered evidence for weeks until they had enough to act. Mr. and Mrs. Choppy of 144 14th Avenue, John Castry of 1224 South Main Street, and Mary Pushka of 7 Magnolia Street were all arrested on charges of selling liquor. They pleaded guilty and were fined $1,000 each. During the raid, over 1,000 gallons of wine plus 3 dozen bottles of beer were found at the Choppy house. On the same day as these other raids, federal agents, working independently from the local authorities, raided the warehouse and then the home of William D. Agustin at 208 15th Avenue. First, the federals swooped down on the D'Agustin soft drink warehouse at 324 North Madison Street and collected 800 gallons of alcohol. Then they proceeded to the D'Agustin home, cut the telephone wires, and arrested D'Agustin. Within 15 minutes, the agents had taken D'Agustin into custody and confiscated 70 gallons of liquor. The Rockford Police Department, the Winnebago County Sheriff's Office, and even State's Attorney William D. Knight had no idea the raid was going to take place. The federal agents were in Rockford less than 2 hours for the whole process. Some of the leaders of the bootlegging gangs met to discuss joining forces to protect themselves against the raids. But as sometimes happens, one party thought another party wanted too much of the pie, and negotiations literally exploded into gunfire. This time, it was the attempted murder of police spotters David Dotz, 23, and his 18-year-old brother Alex on September 22, 1926. The Dotz brothers were called Spotters Deluxe because of the number of bootleggers they reported on. The boys were leaving their house at 905 6th Avenue and climbing into their vehicle when they noticed a large sedan approaching. The 4 men in the passing car opened fire with their shotguns, and as a result, David was injured in one eye. He would later lose sight in this eye because of the wound. Alex was grazed in the head and took a full hit to his shoulder that broke his scapula. The car continued down 5th Street toward Keith Creek, turned west onto 8th Avenue, and then onto Kishwaukee Street, where it was lost in traffic. Police found one of the firearms in a creek a few blocks down the street from the Dotz home. Later, State's Attorney Knight took David to a garage where a car matching the description was found. David identified the car as the one used in the shooting and told the police that he had recognized Philip Caltagirone, George Saladino, and Tom DiGiovanni as the shooters. The next spring, the 3 men were put on trial for the attempted murder of Alex Dotz. The trial lasted 15 days and ended in an acquittal for the men. It was described in the newspaper, "The trial of the 3 defendants was one of the most sensational and long drawn-out criminal trials in the legal history of Winnebago County." After the trial, State's Attorney Knight was quoted, "I have seen the signs of this growing boldness for some time, and this shooting is what I've been expecting. It is time the people of Rockford awoke to the bootleg menace here. The time has come to choose to decide whether it will become another Cicero or Canton." The Dotz brothers were so frightened by the attack that they not only left Rockford, but also Illinois, and moved to Kenosha, Wisconsin. Later, they would be arrested for a robbery that occurred at the Kenosha Theater in which $1,000 was taken. The Dotz boys claimed they were framed. It was a hard fall for the once legendary police spotters. On January 30th, 1928, Larry McGill, a 23-year-old watchman employed at the Joseph Bear Junkyard, was shot. He was with a couple of friends in a Bear Company truck, sitting outside a house on the corner of Keefe and 15th Avenues. His companions were William Oberg and Joseph Kransky, both 17 years old. The house that Larry was observing that evening was owned by Joseph Choppy. As he lay dying, Larry McGill testified to Assistant State's Attorney Carl Williams and Robert Nash at Rockford Hospital. Later, he would tell police that he was just curious and decided to watch the house. There was a betrothal party going on at the house, and McGill wanted to see who attended. The other 2 boys' stories matched McGill's. According to Larry, 2 men and a woman left the house. One man, dressed in a long fur coat, spotted Larry and his companions sitting in the truck. The man approached the pickup truck, yelled profanity, slapped one of the men with McGill, and then shot McGill. McGill told police that Vince Big Jim DeVerno shot him. DeVerno was known to police as a rum runner, racketeer, and a general bad character. He had also been questioned in Freeport as a suspect in other shooting and stabbing assaults. DeVerno owned a grocery store in Freeport, and police from both Rockford and Freeport searched for him. They followed tips in several different cities, and there were reports that police met with DeVerno's wife to work out a possible surrender. But it was all in vain, and authorities never found DeVerno. Police suspected that Larry was working undercover as a spotter for one of the local gangs, and his cover was blown when he got careless. They did not believe his story of just being curious about the partygoers. Coroner Fred Olson searched for family members to claim McGill's body and had just about given up hope when McGill's estranged wife appeared. She made arrangements for Larry's body to be shipped to Cherry, Illinois, where she lived with their young son. Mrs. McGill promised Coroner Olson that she would bury Larry like his parents would have wanted. Less than a week later, another murder, this one even more violent, took place. Tom Para, 35 years old, also known as Retta, was once in the bootlegging business. He lived at 726 South Winnebago with his family. During the first week of January 1928, all of Para's bootlegging equipment was confiscated by the boss of one of the local gangs. A couple of days later, he decided to approach the police to offer to become a spotter for them. He was assigned to a partner who was working in Freeport. Para moved his family to a new home at 810 Houghton Street on January 30th, 1928. Later that day, he left the house and his family never saw him alive again. Para went missing on Tuesday, January 30th, but evidence showed he had only been dead a couple of days when he was found on Tuesday, February 6th, 1928. Para was the first Italian to turn into a spotter, and the man who worked with Para in Freeport said that Para was very spooked by the whole idea. Para's body was found around 9 a.m. on February 6th by Ben Olson, a farmer who lived near Cherry Valley. Olson was headed into New Milford with his wagon when he made the gruesome discovery. Para was found in the woods off Perryville Road by the old rifle range, 1 mile east of New Milford. Para was lying on his left side, about 50 yards east of the road in the wagon ruts that lead through the woods. He had been shot in the head 4 times and blood covered his face. The bullets had entered the back of Para's head on the right side and exited on the left side of the forehead. He had his arms up in front of him as if he was trying to protect his head. The gun used for the killing was found a short distance away from the body. Another farmer, Frank Carlson, told police he heard several shots on Sunday morning. He did not report the gunfire because he thought it might be a hunter. Another farmer who lived in the area said he noticed cars coming and going in the woods, but that was usual for a Sunday. It seemed that the location was popular as a lover's lane. Para's wife, Rose, had been confined to her bed since shortly before he went missing. She was expecting their next child. Rose gave birth, and police waited to tell her of her husband's death because she was in serious condition after the birth of her 5th child. The Welfare Society and visiting nurses nursed the mother and baby while caring for the other 4 children. The family was left destitute by the death of Para. Police were searching for Walter Filkins, the man who was Para's partner for the spotter job in Freeport. They were hoping he could shed some light on the motive for the killing. They also suspected that the partner might have told local bootleggers of Para's true identity as a police spotter. Police never found Filkins, and Para's murder was never solved. The bootleggers in Rockford got very nervous after the deaths of Para and McGill. There were also rumors that federal agents were heading into Rockford for a mop-up campaign. The sellers were so cautious they turned customers away if there were any strangers in the area or the buyers were unfamiliar. There were also rumors that since it was suspected that some of the police force might be involved or at least warning the bootleggers of the raids, federal agents were working independently of local authorities. The next time the guns roared, it was not a spotter they were aimed at. Gaetano DiSalvo, known as Tom DiSalvo, 29 years old, owned a cafe at 1301 Seminary Street. He was a well-known racketeer who ended up at the wrong end of a gun. Tom's body was found on September 2, 1928, on the 200 block of Morgan Street, inside a car he had borrowed from another alleged gang member, Peter Salamone. DiSalvo was slumped over the steering wheel of the fancy LaSalle Roadster with 9 steel jacket bullets inside his body. Police had a difficult time with this investigation because no one wanted to share any information. They uncovered the fact that DiSalvo had moved to Rockford a year before his death from Cleveland. He still had a brother in Akron, Ohio. DiSalvo was finely dressed and had a large diamond ring on his finger and a diamond stick pin in his tie. DiSalvo carried a bank book with entries that added to over $1,000. He also had papers that declared his intent to apply for citizenship. The papers stated that he moved to the United States from Italy in 1923. Police questioned DiSalvo's supposed sweetheart, Lillian Tinney, who denied that they were lovers. Apparently, DeSalvo had a wife whom he left back in Italy. Lillian did admit she worked for him at his cafe and was in love with him. She claimed to have no idea why someone would kill him. Lillian was with DeSalvo on the night he was killed. DeSalvo took Lillian for a drive before dropping her off at home around 6 o'clock in the evening. Others, who remained nameless, did admit to the police that DeSalvo was in the illegal alcohol business and that he had crossed another prominent local bootlegger and paid for it with his life. Another theory that was shared with police was that DeSalvo was killed as retaliation for the torture and murder of Tom Para. One thing was certain. When DeSalvo pulled his LaSalle Roadster up in front of the blacksmith shop on Morgan Street, there were at least 2 men waiting for him. One was probably on the sidewalk and engaged DeSalvo in conversation. Another man approached from the street and fired a bullet into the back of DeSalvo's head. Both men opened fire and shot 8 more bullets into DeSalvo's body. Only 6 people showed up for DeSalvo's funeral. Even his girl, Lillian, stayed away. The paper claimed that DeSalvo had no friends and no one mourned his death, except for maybe his wife in Italy, who, not knowing of his brutal shooting, waited for his return.